Kaya ya nunuk mam and yoga, ya kulingwa, babing nichawa, dwanka ya kulingwa. You know what's amazing? I'm going to guess that not many people speak Nyungar in the room and you knew exactly what to do. That's pretty cool. Kaya wanju nicha Nyungar buja, nicha buja ngang mutam buja, mam and yoga, kulinga ya kuling nichawa, nicha bujawa. So, in the Nyungar language, the Whadjuk Nyungar language, which is the native tongue or the traditional language of this area, the traditional owners and custodians of this country, the Whadjuk Nyungar people, I, as a representative, would like to welcome you to today's event. My name is Ingrid Cumming and I'm one of the very many Whadjuk Nyungar women of this area, and I'm absolutely honoured to be here with all of you today. I'm going to do a welcome to country for you, and it involves a songline that comes from a place called Kalamardha here in Perth. So has anyone been to Kalamardha before? Just a show of hands, Kalamardha. No one? Say it with an Aussie accent. Kalamunda, that's right. So who's been to Kalamunda? There it is. So Kalamardha, which is how it's pronounced originally, obviously turned into Kalamunda. And I love that story because it's about when the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people came together and they shared their stories, and that story or that name has been retained until today. So although we say it a little bit differently. But Kalamardha, or Kalamunda as you know it, was a place where lots of coming together ceremonies occurred. Things like weddings, things like meeting people from other nations or language groups. It was a place of gathering and celebration, which is what today's gathering really is all about also. So in the spirit of celebrating, in the spirit of many different people coming together, sharing their knowledge and going forward together, I'm going to ask you all to join with me in the celebration through the ceremony called Welcome to Country by clapping your hands. Easy way to earn your lunch. Not too hard at all. And I'm going to sing in language. Now, $50 for anyone who can translate it, except for my uncle down there who's probably heard me do it 100 times. Uncle Flano, I like to call him. How you going today? That's good. I'm going to ask you all to clap your hands, try and figure out what I'm singing, but the song is about people coming together. It's about going forward together in strength and in unity here on what is known as Whadjuk Nyungar country, but also your country in which you're connected to. So I'm going to start the beat and get you guys to clap along. Are you ready? Kaya kopida wirin, kaya kopida wirin, nyaku kopida wirin, Jeraning Yiranuna, Mamin Yoga Kulinga, Mamin Yoga Kulinga, Jeraning Yiranuna, Nichan Yunga Puja, Kopidan Yunga Puja, Maya Maya Ngang Mutang, Maya Maya Ngang Kulinga, Maya Maya Ngang Kulinga, Wanju Nichan Yunga Puja. Woo! Nyungar Got Talent will be airing shortly on network to be released. So the song is about us coming together in the spirit of reconciliation, many different people and many different strengths. And I'll leave you with this message. My mum is actually Russian. I'm a black Russian. How good is that? Tell that joke a lot these days. Anyway, my dad's a Nyungar man, and many, many years ago in this country, they were told that their love is forbidden and they couldn't be together. And in the end, what they did do is listen to their Kartkut Wirin. They listened to their head, heart and their spirit, and they came together. So me standing here today is proof of when Indigenous and non-Indigenous and people of difference come together, clearly it creates beautiful things. Have a wonderful lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid, for setting the scene so beautifully for today's lunch. Welcome one and all to the second Perth in Focus event for 2016. I'm Marion Fulker, I'm the CEO of the Committee for Perth, and I think right at the outset I need to say congratulations to RAC, who have pretty much got an all-male table. could be the winning stars today. So I'm really pleased that there are so many men in the room today, and thank you very much for coming. I'd like to acknowledge our VIPs today, the Honourable Kerry Sanderson AO, Governor of Western Australia, who will shortly provide the opening address. The Governor has been a close follower of the work of the Committee for Perth, and I really enjoyed meeting with her when she was in her London office as Agent General to WA. And that role has now followed on with our founding director, John Atkins, taking up the position in September last year. We've got 2 local government members here today represented by elected and staff members, and that's the cities of Melville and South Perth, so welcome to you. And to our directors, Deputy Chair Gai McMath, Michael Schock, Maya Vandendryzen and Linda Wayman, welcome to you too. Our Chairman, John Langalont AO, sends his very best wishes for a happy and positive and practical event today, and he's very disappointed he can't be here. And over the last couple of months, he's held 2 Chairman's 20 events, really trying to think about how to fill the pool. The first one was a male-only one, which we're very grateful for Brookfield for hosting in what I think is the last bastion of maleness, Bondi's old office. So apparently lots of guys were very starstruck and taking pictures of selfies, really, of them in that inner sanctum there. And then we had the women's only event at Lamont's, which the Governor also attended, and I think that was a very constructive event as well. And John has 2 further events planned for later in the year, which are very much about the males and females coming together and putting together an action plan and then reviewing how progress is going. The aim of these Perth in Focus events is to provide a public forum to discuss issues of critical importance to Perth's growth and development. And in my time at the Committee for Perth, and this is our 10th year of operation and my 9th year as CEO, we've tackled a range of issues. However, it's filling the pool, I think, that it has had the most resonance, given us the most profile and the most engagement with our members and broader stakeholders. Today, it is 11 months since we launched Filling the Pool here in this room, and many of you were here at that moment. The Filling the Pool report contains a roadmap of 31 interlocking recommendations so that government, organisations and women can work towards more females participating and, importantly, progressing in corporate life in Perth. So much has happened since the 3rd of June last year. I personally have done more than 50 presentations on Filling the Pool, both to our members but also to peak bodies and interest groups. And as I said, John's also held his forums with 2 more planned to be held. Today's luncheon provides the opportunity, almost a year to the day, to hear from one of Perth's leading businesswomen and non-executive directors, Diane Smith-Gander, who will share parts of her career and life journey against the recommendations for women contained in Filling the Pool. One thing I have learned is that everyone's journey is different. We all have war stories, we all have successes. But what I do believe is that collective action around the recommendations in Filling the Pool will be what makes the fundamental difference so that we can make the most of the talented women we have in this town. I really look forward to Diane's presentation and the panel session that will follow, which will give you the opportunity from the floor to ask questions. So to get proceedings underway, can I please ask you to welcome Her Excellency, the Honourable Kerry Sanderson AO, Governor of Western Australia.
Thank you, Marion, and it is indeed a great pleasure to be here today and to see this room so full. I'd like to acknowledge Mrs. Marion Faulkner, Chief Executive Officer, Committee for Perth, Mrs. Diane Smith-Gander, Guest Speaker, a distinguished guest all. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Noongar people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I'm very pleased to open what I believe will be a very interesting discussion, and I look forward to hearing later from Di Smith-Gander and the panel. I think most here would be aware of the studies which establish the business case for gender diversity. To quote from the US studies, companies with a higher representation of women on their board had a return on equity that was 53% higher. Australian studies confirm this business case, including a study by the La Trobe Business School of 300 of Australia's top 500 listed companies between 2005 and 2011. In short, it concluded that top publicly listed companies that employ more women on the boards make more money. At the management level, a 2008 McKinsey & Company study showed that companies with the most gender-diverse management teams have an average EBIT 48% higher than their industry norms. It's not that women are inherently more talented than men or that they necessarily have skills men lack. Rather, it seems those companies which identify and promote female talent into leadership roles have cultures that enable them to recognise talent in any form and make good use of it. And research shows that one is not enough. Women must be present in sufficient numbers at senior levels to drive cultural change and better business results. So in the context of these results, I congratulate the Committee for Perth and the sponsors for the Filling the Pool study, which is a seminal report with a view to increasing professional participation rates in Western Australia for women. I encourage any of you who haven't had a chance to read the report to do so, and it's available on the committee's website. I was fortunate, as Marion mentioned, to be involved in the Committee for Perth Chairman's 20 lunch to discuss progressing the report. One of the issues we agreed on was the importance of targets. And targets I see as important because they do drive behaviour. I mentioned by way of example the board of Dana EDI, which I was part of before taking my role as governor. Before I joined, the board was seeking additional directors and decided that one should be from WA and also that they wanted a woman. They were told that there were no suitable candidates, that's the board was told, but one of the directors used Google and found 2 women with relevant experience, me and Eve Howell, and in the end both of us joined the board. In this case, the board had sent a target and the end result was that the target was exceeded. But the board needed to put in extra effort to search for women from WA. And it did seem to make a difference, with the original sole female director confirming this. You may have heard the saying about women on the board: 1 is a token, 2 is a conspiracy, and 3 makes a difference. So progress to me is best measured against targets, and for targets to be effective, they obviously need to be specific and measurable and subject to reporting, hopefully with some form of reward. I was pleased to see that Filling the Pool had recommendations for government. They also had recommendations for organisations and also for individual women. And some of these recommendations were discussed at the Chairman's 20 lunch, and I would like to touch on a few of these now. One issue is the need for women to have more confidence and to take more opportunities. Generally, as discussed, a woman may hesitate to apply for a job if she doesn't think that she meets all the selection criteria. And in truth, I would not have thought to apply for the last 4 jobs I've had. However, being invited to undertake the role, I recognised the importance of the jobs and decided to take the opportunity. So Filling the Pool recommended that women themselves work on self-confidence, and I think that self-confidence is very much helped by working hard in particular roles, because you have to master the role to be confident of it. It's also by taking opportunities and learning from them. Positive thinking is important to all of us. Filling the Pool also recommended a government-led integrated initiative to increase the number of girls undertaking STEM, that is science, technology, engineering and maths subjects at high school. I was very pleased to see the emphasis on STEM, and I believe such an initiative is important for both sexes. Australia's chief scientist has said that 75% of the fastest growing occupations in the future will require STEM skills. In the US, it is suggested that 60% of the workforce by 2020 will require skills held by only 20% of the current workforce, and I suspect that Australia may be similar. Future success and productivity is driven by science, technology and innovation, all of which require an understanding of maths. In this context, I find it rather alarming that only 0.4% of Australian university students are entering into tertiary education to pursue degrees in mathematics or statistics. And that's less than half of the OECD average of 1%, and less than 1/4 of the UK figure of 2%, and 1/6 of the New Zealand figure of 3%. Now, the relative position is even worse for women. At Australian universities, twice as many men as women are undertaking undergraduate courses in mathematical sciences, and 4 times as many men as women are taking fourth-year honours courses. Not only do we as a society need to work to encourage the study of maths and other STEM subjects, but we need to reverse the narrative that told girls that they were not as good at science as boys. I think I was very fortunate to have completed my science degree with a double major in mathematics before people even found that girls were not meant to be as good at maths as boys. I'd like to spend a minute to focus also on the He for She campaign. Emma Watson made an excellent speech in launching this UN campaign, and I'd like to quote a little from it. She said, "We must try to mobilise as many men and boys as possible to be advocates for change. We don't want to just talk about it." And she went on to say, "Men, I would like to give you this opportunity to extend your formal invitation. Gender equality is your issue too. Because to date I've seen my father's role as a parent being less valued by society, I've seen young men suffering from mental illness, unable to ask for help for fear it would make them less of a man. In fact, in the UK, suicide is the biggest killer of men between 20 and 49, and I've seen men fragile and insecure by what constitutes male success. Men don't have the benefits of equality either." So I think they were very deep words for such a young person. And a recent Bain and Company and Chief Executive Women study indicated the importance of work flexibility for both sexes. But an interesting point to come out from it was that men were more hesitant to take advantage of it, feeling that it may jeopardise their future promotion. So again, that's not an indicator of equality. I think there are a couple of other areas which illustrate the importance of working together, and that, like the He for She campaign, we can't expect those affected by it to solve it themselves. First, in terms of disadvantage, while Aboriginal girls aged 10 to 17 are less likely to be in prison or under community supervision than Aboriginal youths, they are a shocking 16 to 19 times more likely to be respectively under community supervision or incarcerated than non-Indigenous girls. Again, another case where we need to set a target of equality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous and work with those affected on practical measures to improve the situation. In addition, I'm very impressed by the Autism Academy for Software Quality Assurance at Curtin University, where the Academy is training persons on the autism spectrum in software checking, and that's actually a skill which they've proved to be better at generally than people who are not autistic. The Academy aims to train them and find them internships, but already the evidence is that they will prove very valuable employees with their focus on the task and detail. And up until now, their labour force participation rate has been only about half that of the general population because of their difficulty in finding work. I give these examples because disadvantage in any form costs our economy dearly, whether it be disadvantage because of gender, race, or perceived disability. Eliminating all forms of disadvantage is important, and in this regard, the quality of our education generally continues to be important, including eliminating extreme underperformance caused by disadvantage. The OECD report entitled Universal Basic Skills, What Countries Stand to Gain, stated that even for a developed country, raising all students to the basic skill level by 2030 could add 3.5% to GDP. The OECD points out that the payoff in developed countries could be enough to pay for the primary and secondary education of all students, which to me is a cogent argument, as well as a social argument, but a cogent economic argument for the continued focus on disadvantage. In conclusion, I praise the Committee for Perth and the sponsors of Filling the Pool for taking a leadership role and focusing on gender disadvantage and making some very practical recommendations. For Australia, the foregone GDP from failing to adequately engage women in the workforce represents an annual loss of about $300 billion to the economy. This is a potential gain we need to aim for. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Governor for setting such a very good scene for today's discussion. I understand the main courses are coming out now. The Hyatt has prepared a beautiful lunch as always, so Sholto, thank you to you and your staff for looking after us so well. And we'll leave you for a few minutes and then I'll come back and introduce Diane, who'll do about a half an hour presentation, and then we'll get on to the panel session where you get a chance to ask questions. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll make a start if you don't mind. Shh. Okay, I think just about everyone's finished eating, so apologies for those of you who haven't, but I thought we would make a start. So my job over the next sort of 10 minutes is to run you through the recommendations of filling the pool to really sort of set the scene for discussion that will follow. So here's filling the pool and our project sponsors. So our major funding partner was Shell, and we really appreciated the contribution that they made, as well as the Department of Local Government and Communities, EY, Westpac and Worley Parsons. And as part of the project, we had a project steering committee which was gender balanced, and I do actually think it gave us a much better result. So we're now using that as the model for all of our projects moving forward. And the one that we're deeply immersed in the moment is our Get a Move On project, which is about transport and congestion. And pleasingly for that, a subject that you would think is very heavily male-dominated, we've actually got a gender-balanced steering committee for that as well. So here's the roadmap of recommendations, 31 things that interlock with each other. And we wanted to know, when we set out on our journey of filling the pool, was there something in Western Australia that was different, that was making less women return to work? And if they were returning to work, or even starting their career and staying in their career, what was this thing called the Perth Cliff? This sort of point in their career at about 10 years where people started making decisions about family, where women were taking the lion's share of those family caring responsibilities and finding it very hard to come back to work and do meaningful work and juggle both work and home. So there are 4 things that are different in Western Australia, more pronounced. So the 4 things that make a woman successful in returning to work after some sort of interruption to her career, which could be caring for children, it could be caring for the elderly, it could be taking time out to do some extra study, it could be that they want to be a mountain climber for a few years, whatever it happens to be. So you need spousal support. You need a man in your life or a partner in your life who can help you and be your support person. And what women said was, we've got so many of our men working in FIFO roles, formal roles, so we have the highest FIFO workforce in the country. So we understood, yep, men on rosters are away from home for a period of time. But there's also what we call informal FIFO, so that's men in corporate life who have to travel often with only a day's notice. They might be away for longer than originally planned. And any meeting on the East Coast means at least 1 night's overnight stay, if not 2, let alone if you've got to go into Asia and Europe where you could be away for weeks. So women did actually report that if their husband was on a formal FIFO roster, they could probably rely on friends and family and call on, nannies and other things. But it's the drop of a hat travel for both them and for their spouses that really made it very problematic. So that was one thing. You also need family support, this sort of sense of having an extended family, people that you can rely on. And during the boom, the greatest number of people that came were women 25 to 40, so those sort of childbearing years, who came without access to an extended family. And that certainly is my career journey. I arrived in my early 20s, had a family, no family here to support me, and I ended up adopting grandparents for my daughters. Now, I know that there's some sort of rent-a-granny system going on at the moment, so it's obviously very prevalent. You also need a flexible work environment in which to return to, and pleasingly 50% of the organisations that participated in the Filling the Pool study did have some sort of flexible work practices. However, they did report back that there was a sense of it was only women taking it, a very small majority of women, not enough men, so it wasn't flexible work practice for all, it was only flexible work practice for some. So we do find circumstances here in WA different, and acutely in terms of childcare. So women reported trying to get childcare arrangements that they were happy with for their children, who might span both the sort of baby toddler years as well as the school years, primary and high school. So it wasn't just about childcare during those sort of formative years, it was before and after school care, and particularly vacation care. So 14 weeks or 12 weeks a year trying to cover vacation care and hoping that your children are adequately cared for while you're trying to juggle work and home. So WA is different. We always pride ourselves on being different, and in these circumstances, unfortunately, we're different at a detrimental level. So when the roadmap of recommendations came together, we understood that we were dealing with some structural issues as well as some cultural issues. And the cultural issues women reported were a lot around peer pressure to not return to work. So 1 in 3 women in the study, 150 women interviewed all up, 1 in 3 women reported that if their husbands earned good money or their partners earned good money, why was it that they felt the need to go back to work? And this commentary came from the older generations, and maybe you could accept that, but often it came from their sisters and their friends as well. So that was pretty galling for a lot of women. So we also knew that there was discouragement going on at the school level about girls taking on subjects that were seen to be more better suited to men, as the Governor pointed out. So we did have a circumstance where a girl wanted to study advanced maths, and both her parents had to go to the school and sign a form to understand that it was going to be difficult for her. So, you know, that sort of stuff is just really not on. So we do have some cultural issues here in Perth that I think are different somewhat to the East Coast. So the interlocking recommendations seek to address the cultural issues as well as the sort of structural issues that we have in play. So honing in on them, what can government do? So we've really felt that government could look at the issue of childcare places, and the department has prepared a briefing note for me on what's happening there, and the Minister is ready to convene a meeting of all of the different stakeholders and also liaise with federal government, who have a role to play there, to understand what are the barriers to providing childcare that's flexible and can span all of those different needs that you have. One of the things that the department's also looking at doing is what red tape reduction can happen so that more childcare places can be opened. And since the Filling the Pool report came out, another childcare centre has been added to the CBD, so we now have 3, thanks to Shell coming in as their anchor tenant down at King Square precinct and putting that in as one of their demands for moving there. And I understand Woodside will also put a childcare centre into their new building as well. So that's good. There's more availability of childcare places in the CBD. But as I said, I think if you've got one child and you're looking for childcare arrangements, that's great. When you've got one child where you're looking for childcare and then your other child's already at primary school, you've got a real juggling act about where you drop them and should they be co-located and all those other sorts of things. Bringing awareness to the cultural issues, we really felt was government's role to run a big campaign like you would with, say, smoking or seatbelts or anything like that. So really promoting to girls that there were lots of opportunities out there and trying to tackle some of these sort of stereotyping that was going on. And the department's also advised there that they've done some preliminary work around what would be the way you would tackle something like that, because you don't want to be too sort of draconian and lecturing about people. I think it's more about developing a campaign that really draws attention to the inequity in the current system. And then there's obviously STEM and trying to encourage girls to study in those areas. So there's some work being done there as well. The recommendations in the middle are for organisations, and there was a woman in the room on the day that the report was launched and said, well, I can see recommendations for government, I can see recommendations for organisations, and I can see recommendations for women, but where are the recommendations for men? But in essence, the report showed that most of the men ran Perth, St George's Terrace, and so really it's what can organisations do, in brackets, what can the men do? So there's lots of recommendations. That's the body of the recommendations. We talk about embracing the economic argument, which the Governor so beautifully outlined. And we haven't won that argument despite more than 2 decades of research showing that women on boards and executive roles actually do add to the bottom line. We talked about change being driven from the top, and what was really sort of distressing at the beginning of the filling the pool process, doing the interviews in late 2013, was that not one single board that we interviewed had gender on the agenda. Now I imagine that's quite different some 3 years on, but it certainly wasn't seen as a corporate issue back then. So we said it's got to be driven from the top and it's got to be driven all the way through the organisation. And we recommended targets with teeth. We didn't go as far as to say that there should be quotas, but really it's a de facto. It's saying that the board should set the agenda for gender, and then the CEO should be measured and all the way down the organisation, so that there's this push and pull factor between graduates and those people who finally make it into the executive and board level roles. And we have seen a lot of movement in terms of graduate programs, very good sort of equity of women going in to those roles. But as the Filling the Pool report said, that's actually not the hardest part. The hardest part is sustaining women throughout their careers, and I'm very pleased to see more graduates coming in as females, but I just don't think that's just one thing that needs to be done. We said there has to be accountability on those targets and there has to be reported. And one of the recommendations, if you didn't think you had a problem in your organisation, go and do a pay audit. That would be a good way of quantifying whether you did actually have an issue or not. And we do know that some companies have undertaken audits and they've found some discrepancies which they're seeking to address. I know one company fixed their problem within just a few days, and other organisations have been slower. What the informal women's network on the terrace tells me is those companies that haven't reported back the findings are the companies where women who work there are quite nervous about what disparities might exist. So if you have done a pay audit, I think it's a sort of undertaking to go back and tell your staff where you're at and what measures you're going to take to address it. Certainly quotas and targets was debated a lot throughout the 2-year project. And I imagine that in 5 years' time, if we're standing here and there hasn't been huge traction on this issue, we'll probably be the first organisation to talk about quotas, and I'm sure the panel will discuss that a little bit more. So we talked about very practical measures as well, making sure that a woman's on the shortlist, making sure a woman's part of the recruitment panel, making sure that you have good promotion, selection strategies, etc., etc. So there was lots of good things in there for organisations to do. And the organisations at the end, which is where really Diane's going to concentrate on, is the recommendations for women. And there's a recommendation sitting right out there on the right, recommendation 23, and it says start with the end goal in mind. And the advice from women to women in the Filling the Pool report really says pick a good bloke, pick a good partner, someone who's going to share your journey with you and help you realise your aspirations. And I can personally say I didn't pick a good bloke in the beginning. And, you know, there's nothing like having somebody who is as supportive of you as you are of them. There's a recommendation in there about self-confidence, and I'm sure that Diane will touch on that. Very much every woman who was in a senior or executive role who was interviewed for Filling the Pool, so we're talking about nearly 100 women, said that they lacked self-confidence at some point, and some women said on a daily basis. So this sense of feeling a fraud, that they'll be found out to not be good enough, to be compared to a male and not be as good. So there was a real sort of underlying sense of just not being competent at doing the job. And I totally agree with the Governor. If you master your role and you know that you're as good at it as the next person, it doesn't matter what gender you are or what gender they are. So there is a lot of discussion there about self-confidence. Be strategically opportunistic is very much my career journey. I have taken opportunities as and when they've arisen, and we say to women that that is a really good way of getting the attention of your CEO or of the executive management or even of the board. Take a project on, take a special project, take an assignment somewhere else. Do what you can to differentiate yourself from everybody else who's going for promotion inside your organisation or going for a new role outside. Be as competitive as you possibly can be. And women said that, look, I've got enough on my plate already. I'm trying to do my job. I'm trying to juggle all the family commitments I've got, and the last thing I need to do is take on something else. And my take on something else was to do an MBA at Curtin part-time while I worked full-time. And at the time I thought I was going to die of tiredness, and I never thought I would get through it. But with the support of the organisation that I work for, so half of the degree was finished while I was at Committee for Perth, and half of it from the support of my family, including me screaming down the corridor, can I have another Tim Tam? I thoroughly recommend doing the MBA. I was a generalist. I didn't have any, sort of major specific skills that I could bring, and the MBA just gave me that credibility and certainly made me a lot more competitive than others, and Diane might touch on study and those sorts of things. Bring men into the conversation is one of the key recommendations, and that's why I'm so pleased to see many more men in the room than was here this time last year. The more of you that can be advocates for the issue, to understand what the problems are and to, importantly, understand what the solutions are. And often men will say to me, what's one thing I could do today that would make a difference? And I say, be an advocate for a woman. Somebody that you've worked alongside, somebody that you know is good and competent, and you can talk up for them when perhaps they won't or can't talk up for themselves. So that's one take home you can take today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Diane Smith-Gander. Now, I've got this really long blurb, and she said, why don't you just say, I'm a Perth-born and bred girl. I live 900 metres away from where I was originally born. I've had a very varied career. I've worked in Australia and I've worked in the US, and she's worked for a name brand like Westpac and another like McKinsey. And I think, Diane needs no introduction to this audience. She's a very proud West Australian and a very great advocate for women in her role as President of Chief Executive Women. So, Diane.
Thank you very much, Marion. I must admit I did look at the blurb of all of the things that I've done, do and so forth, and thought if we read that out, we're going to be here for some little while. And I look around this room and I see so many of my friends and people that I work with and do things with. And so thank you all for turning out today to hear me talk. I've been going through some very interesting times. And people say to me, wow, you must be under so much stress and pressure, and are you going to cancel our event? I'm like, no. And you think, what is it that allows me to be dealing with a hostile takeover on one hand, but still very comfortable to come and speak to a group like this? And I think it is because of the support of so many people in the room. So I would just briefly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Noongar people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to note that I'm a very strong supporter for constitutional recognition of our First Peoples. Marion, you're quite right. I'm going to talk about confidence. And one of the things I say to people is, when you first come up to the podium to speak, you need to show that you're going to be confident. So it doesn't matter how fantastic the people who have been before you have been. You never say, wow, that's a hard act to follow. And you never say, I'm nervous, or I don't do this very often, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, because what that does with your audience is it completely builds in their mind that no matter how fantastic you are, that what they have just seen is not as good as what they saw before, or what they've just seen is a nervous and not very good performance. So I always counsel people, don't do that. Even if you have the sweaty palms and your voice is catching in your throat and your heart rate is pounding, all that adrenaline, fear stuff is happening, don't say that. Fake it till you make it, is the thing that you say. But I'm actually just about to break my own rule, because the two women that have spoken before me, and I know you will all agree, are both really hard acts to follow, because they are class acts. And I just did particularly want to acknowledge our governor, our first female governor. So, Your Excellency, I just have to say that the way you are carrying yourself in this role, we all knew you'd be fantastic, but you have this wonderful way of being able to carry the question of gender equity without putting anybody offside and making it a true conversation with men. And I just think it's fantastic the way that you are carrying that agenda around Indigenous women as well, and making that very much around their development and their leadership in a setting that I think is creating many programs which are going to deliver an annuity return for this state for years to come. So thank you so much for what you do. So, the world of gender equity is really moving on. I think that we are in a better place today than we've ever been, but as the Governor's words told us, there is still a long way to go. And as Marion's words told us, we now have an evidence base in this wonderful Filling the Pool report. This is unique. There is no other report like this anywhere on the planet, and trust me, I have actually checked. And as organisations have worked out that putting women in your leadership team is good for you, but it's also, importantly, not a path to sustainable competitive advantage, because everybody is going to do it. It's becoming table stakes. If you can't make your organisation friendly for women, you really can't make it friendly for anyone. Because I don't know that there's any person on the planet that wants their work life to be a thing that takes them away from their family. You know, I remember when my father retired, hearing stories of men that had worked with him who were looking forward to their retirement on the golf course, trying to connect with their children, playing a role with their grandchildren, and within months they've had a heart attack or some other major health event that has meant that they can't do what they were planning on doing in their retirement. And I remember looking at it and thinking, there's no value proposition in that. I really hope it doesn't happen to my father. Now, my father made it to 81 before the WA disease of melanoma took him from us. But I remember thinking very strongly at that point, we need to be different. And I think men want to have their work-life balance, although many of you know I don't talk about work-life balance. I say you've got one life, so please get on and live it. And work is just a part of that. So organisations do need to recognise that flexibility, providing an environment in which people can be their most productive and thrive, is all about everybody, not just about the women. But I do want to focus today, as Marion said I would, on what women do on this particular slide. So it's the things that lead to start with what you plan to do at the end. Now, I'm not going to embarrass you lot here, but I've got my book, right? Here's Filling the Pool. And I can show you it's highlighted, it's got comments in the side, and that's not just for today. But I have a sneaking suspicion that if I asked many of you, do you know about Filling the Pool? Everyone would nod. Have you got a copy? Oh, I've got it online. Yeah, good. Have you read it? Oh, absolutely. But I think most people have probably seen this page. So what I plan to do is actually delve into the report to show you just how fantastic it is and what a roadmap you've got here, just in case you haven't got around to reading it. And it's just as relevant for men and women. And as we go along, I'm going to give myself a bit of a personal scorecard. And I do want to start with, as Marion said, start with the end goal in mind, recommendation number 23. And in the book, it is on page 83, and I will need my glasses to read it because the print is quite small. Because the thing is, I was really bad at this. I absolutely did not do this. But somehow I sort of got here anyway. And when you read on page 83, start with the end goal in mind, the common theme in the people who were interviewed was that they believed that they were predominantly appointed based upon the depth and breadth of their industry experience. And I think I was very fortunate that through my career, I had a couple of moments where my career didn't go as well as it might have. And the important thing for me was that I didn't allow that issue of failure, and it was failure, to define me. What I tried to do was to learn how to allow my reaction to that failure to be the thing that would define me. So as a very strong for example, when I was 42, I hit the glass ceiling at Westpac. And the way I responded to that was actually a failure, because I'm sure there were many vibrant roles in the organisation that if I hadn't been so stroppy and anti and aggressive, might have become available to me. But I don't want any of those. I want the one I want, and I'm really going to stand on my high horse. When you're as tall as me, you stand on that high horse, it's pretty visible that you are angry. So I went to the United States and I joined McKinsey & Company. I had known them, I'd been a client for some time. And it was a very interesting experience for me, because I was the epitome of the experienced hire in McKinsey, but no one knew what on earth that was or quite what to do with me. So I logged into the Washington DC office. I'd been a general manager at Westpac for 5 years. I'd had my own gorgeous corner office. Property worked for me, so I had the best office apart from the CEO. I had an MBA that carried my bag, and I had a personal assistant and a gopher. And all of a sudden, I was on what McKinsey calls a shared desk. So there was one poor overworked assistant who was looking after me and 17 other people. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a big fat mistake. What have I done? Where do I go? But I don't know about you guys, but if I'm out driving and I take a wrong turn or I don't quite understand the instructions, I never go backwards. I never turn the U-turn. I'll find my way. My dad taught me that. So there I was, nose in the air, on the high horse, heels on, pointing ahead at McKinsey, trying to work out what on earth am I going to do. Also, if I ever change careers again or move countries, be very frightened. Sell everything you own and put it into cash. Because when I first went out of consulting to Westpac, the commercial property bubble in Australia burst, and that was when Westpac almost went out of business. When I came back to Westpac the second time, the GFC hit, and this particular one, when I went to the US in early 2000, was when the dot-com bubble burst. So the consulting market had been doing this in North America, and all of a sudden it did this. It fell right off the end of a cliff. And as a result, there was absolutely no work for someone like me who was unusual. And so what happened was I had to go find work wherever I could find it in the McKinsey world. And so I ended up in London doing my basic consulting readiness course. I think it's probably got a much sexier name now, but there I was doing that. And I met some people that were doing some work in Sweden. And there was a spot, and it was a bit of banking work, so off I went. I then got introduced to some people that were doing some work in Germany in agrochemicals, to some people that were doing brewing in South Africa, and so it went. So when I read depth and breadth of experience, was that really where I was headed when I got on that high horse at Westpac? I didn't know it at the time, but thank heavens it was, because like Marion, I was opportunistic, and you'll see that on the road map as well, because I very much believe that the Wesfarmers board wouldn't have found me a potentially exciting non-executive director unless I had had that depth and breadth of experience in so many geographies and so many industries because of the way I reacted to my failure. But I do think you should not follow what I've done. It is great to be opportunistic, but I think it means a slightly different thing. The report also says, and this is the thing that's important, how children are accommodated as part of the end goal is also a critical decision that women need to make and plan for. Now, I'm a childless woman, as I'm sure many of you know. Marion said pick the right partner. For me, it wasn't about prioritising my career. That is not what I did. The issue for me was I didn't have the right man at the right time that I felt I wanted to have children with, let alone have children with and manage a career. And so the reason I say to women, take this one to heart, really start with the end goal in mind, is because of that factor. I have a friend, Stacey, who was one of the most senior women at McKinsey, who right when she first joined McKinsey knew she wanted to have children, so she employed a woman from Guatemala who lived in a shack in the back and looked after those kids. Fast forward 25 years, that woman has US citizenship, a very healthy retirement fund, and a very nice granny flat in the back, and looks after the dog. But that's the sort of thing. Now, there's also up here, I wish I knew how to use the laser pointer. I really should try to work it out. Can I make it happen? Oh, look at this. Okay, so over here somewhere is maybe the courageous conversations. Where's honest conversations? Marion? It's over here somewhere. Recommendation 11. There it is, honest conversations, thank you. So this and this go hand in hand, people. So all the men in the room, I'm giving you permission to have what you think may be a politically incorrect conversation with women about what their end goal is, even if it involves children. I promise we will not think you are getting ready to discriminate against us and make us all redundant as soon as we get pregnant. That stuff is so yesterday, and we just need to move past that. So that's how those two things interact. And as I said, this is table stakes now. So if you're not able to have those honest conversations, and if you're not able to have a strong reputation as an organisation that will allow women to have professional development opportunities, you're going to find you won't get women and you won't have half of the talent pool, and that's a problem. So let's now think over here about this strategically opportunistic. What does that mean? It is not in misalignment of keeping the end game in mind. Because what that is about, and it's very clearly outlined on page 84, folk, women need to be prepared to take on the difficult assignments. Getting these kinds of assignments is facilitated by the fact that many people are reluctant to take them on. I am the chairman of Broad Spectrum. Yes, many people were prepared to take on that difficult assignment. But think about where it's led me. Over the last 2 years, I've had an opportunity to really think about social responsibility in a corporate setting. I've had an opportunity to really think about how the Australian government should deliver its services and what that cost profile looks like. And I have built, to the earlier conversation, a breadth and depth of experience that otherwise I would not have. Although I must admit, I did have one delightful elderly gentleman shareholder who came to me and he said, "You need to be very careful. They only give these jobs to women because they're not doable, dear." And he had this great long list of people like Lorna Inman, who had taken on Billabong, and Sue Morford at Pacific Brands. And actually, sadly, when you sit down and have a bit of a think, there is somewhat of a theme there. So what I would rather you take from that is that there have been women who have been prepared to step up and take these things that might almost have been described in some ways as a poison chalice, and have yet come through the other side and not been in the slightest bit damaged. That's how you build that resilience. I want to talk about a very important topic on this roadmap next, which is down here. Actually, I've just realised I'm being really disrespectful to all you lot over there, aren't I? But I can't see all the way over here, and I don't think my pointer goes that far. Oh, yes, it does. Hang on, sorry, right here. So these two down here. So sorry, guys, looking at that screen. Acquiring sponsors and mentors. This is one of my favourite topics because women love mentors. What does a mentor do? A mentor is someone that has a set of experiences that you haven't had. So they extend your situational reach. My really first mentors, of course, were my parents. But in a corporate setting, the person I talk about the most is Peter Ritchie. So Peter Ritchie was on the Westpac board when I was sent to do a role in Queensland that had 150 branches and thousands of staff reporting to it. My previous job, I'd had 30 people reporting to me, and I thought I was a big, brave line manager in that. Peter ran the McDonald's system, so he knew how to run a distributed branch network, how to deal with region managers that were in control of people, and there were a set of skills I didn't have. But the most important thing that Peter knew was he'd constructed high-performing teams over many years, very successful teams, and I needed to build a team. Because the great gift that Westpac gave me 2 days before I set out for Queensland was that they sent a fax to the 6 region managers that reported to me and made them all redundant. They spilled all the jobs. And then they said, well, you can only have 4 region managers going forward. You need to find 4. Pick, what you want. You can do interviews and stuff like that. I said to Peter, what am I going to do? He said, look, do the interviews. He said, but that's just really superficial. He said, get out there into Queensland country, go to the branches that have never had a visit from a state manager before, ask the customers, find out what people really think about these 6 guys. And then he said, don't pick 4 of them, pick 2, the best 2, and then pick 2 of your own. People that are going to be really different. Make them not even from Queensland, different industries if you possibly can, and they'll be your people, and you can form that as your team. And you'll be successful if you do. Well, actually, we were very successful. I followed his advice. Part of the trick was actually getting one of the 2 I picked to stay. I had to grandfather his redundancy because he had this huge pile of money. He'd been at the bank forever. And he kept saying no to me. And I said to Peter, what do I do? He said, oh, God, you've done this, you've done that, all the things we've asked. He said, the only thing I can think of is ask his wife. Maybe she'll know. And I did, and she did. And what she told me and what I did are between me and Lyndall and Bob Pierce. I'm overly disclosing. You lot know that. Normally it goes from here to here, right straight out. But that's one I'm keeping to myself. So that's mentoring. Don't know how to do it, help me do it. For every mentor that you have, be you a male or a female, what I want you to do is to have 3 supporters, 3 advocates. That is so hard to do. You can gather up mentors, easily, because everyone wants to be helpful. What is the difference with a supporter? A supporter is the person who, like Helen Lynch did for me with Bob Avery, says, I know that woman well enough to be able, Bob, to give you a recommendation about her. I can tell you that if you put her on the Wesfarmers board, she is not going to embarrass you. She's got the right skills. Yes, you always take a risk with anyone that you bring around a board table. It's a very delicate ecosystem. But you need someone that's going to be able to say that that risk is actually manageable. So all of you who are career-minded, and I guess that's probably everyone in the room, think about that. Who are your true supporters? The people who have had enough exposure to you to be able to give that recommendation, to de-risk that selection decision. Because I think we all know, if we're hiring someone, you think, who do I know? They might have given me some referees, but who do I know that actually knows them? And you pick up the phone and you say, mate, what are they like? And that's going to be a very big part of that decision-making process. So who are the people that are on your team that are your supporters? And as I said, for every mentor you've got, make sure you've got 3 of those supporters. And just in defence of all the mentors in the room, let me just say, mentoring is not a marriage. Mentoring is episodic. It's about knowing what question to ask what mentor at what point. Because if you are high maintenance with a mentor, you're asking them to do more, you're trying to turn them into a supporter when they don't have enough exposure in a work sense to do that for you, or you're constantly ringing up to update them on what's going on. Now, if they want that, they can look on Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat. They don't actually have to have it from you. So that high maintenance thing is really bad, because when I worked with Peter, we were very close for a period while I was getting into the job, and then I got busy and I didn't ring him, and 6 months went by and I thought, oh my God, he will never speak to me again. And in fact, when I did finally pick up the phone, because I just couldn't think of anyone else to ask this question to, he said, oh, it's fantastic to hear from you. I've been so busy. I've been feeling guilty about not calling you, but I must say I was really pleased that there wasn't a whole lot you needed, because I would have struggled to have found the time. So don't overuse your mentors, and don't think that they are more than they actually are in the process. There is just one thing that I want to read out on the topic of understanding effective self-promotion and networking, which is recommendation 26, and it's on page 88 of the book. Because I think that is something that for many women, the thought of self-promotion really sends a cold shiver up and down your spine. So this is something that I think Terry, the report author, actually said. It's not a quote from someone else. Work does not speak for itself. Someone has to speak for it. So who's going to speak for it? It's got to be you, or it's got to be some of those supporters. And that's something that I've really not been very good at in my career. I have felt that my work would speak for itself. My outcomes were there for all to see. And certainly I felt, that if I just kept on doing what I was doing, they would understand. They would pluck me out and give me the next opportunity. And I guess I really learnt when I was at McKinsey that they doesn't exist, and pointing your finger out that way is a really bad idea. And you really do have to advocate for what you want, the projects you want, the things you want to do. And networking is actually work. It is not something you should be embarrassed about, because men really know well that when you build strong networks, these are the people who will be your suppliers. These are the people who will be your customers. There is a very commercial purpose to networking. And it is much more fun and much less risky to do work with suppliers to serve customers that you know and know well. So don't ever feel that networking is not real work, because it absolutely is. So that brings me to the last two things I just want to touch on. So these are the things here: being true to yourself, building self-confidence, that I've talked about a little bit. The most important thing in authenticity is to remember that you do actually need to be yourself. Oscar Wilde said it well. It's pretty important to be yourself because everybody else in the room is actually taken. My great friend and mentor Helen Lynch says to me that diversity of style is very much a human right, and I agree with her. One of the things that often happens to women is we get given feedback about our style. We're too assertive, not assertive enough. We're too quiet, we're not loud enough, we don't put ourselves forward enough, we expect to be picked too often. It's all very incoherent and inconsistent, this feedback that we receive. And so what I have decided is that I'm not taking style feedback anymore. And the reason is that it's amazing how you learn these things as you move along. You think, well, I'm never going to learn anything new. I'm 60 next year. Where will the new lessons come from? But at Chief Executive Women, we have a program called the Leaders Program. It launched in Perth this year, and I know there's some organisations in the room that have their women going to that program. It's cohort-based. The idea is that companies send along a number of their women to create an internal network, and then you have the other companies that join, and so you get your external network as well. And one of the pieces in that program is that each woman tells her story in sort of 5 minutes or less, with a bit of a focus on how did I get to where I am and a little bit about me. And I've had the real privilege of sitting in the back of the room and listening to a number of these. And at one stage I thought, gee, that's a lot of time in this course, because there are 50 women. In Perth, to help with the travel, it's a sort of a truncated program where they meet 3 times over a couple of days. But in the traditional programs in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, it's 8 half days a year. So a number of these things happen at each of the programs. But I've worked out why it's so important. And I learned that this point about style, and there are so many different styles. And I heard women describe how successful they had been because of a particular style they deployed, and I could hear in the back of my head various line managers I'd had telling me how bad that style was and how I would never be successful if I had it. So I have worked out that it is my style, and that is the way that will really take me forward, and I'm not going to allow people to tell me that I need to change. But of course I try to be very polite. One of the things I learnt about myself is that my great strength is that I don't like unresolved conflict and issues, because I am a harmony seeker. It has all got to be fine and all tied up and everybody happy and moving in the same direction for me to be very comfortable with the world. So when someone gives me feedback, I don't push back on it. And this is another McKinsey thing. So Naveen, sorry, I'm about to give one of the McKinsey toolkit away. When someone gives you feedback, you have only one responsibility. That is to look them in the eye, put on your most dazzling smile and say, thank you so much. You don't elaborate. You don't justify yourself. Now, maybe if there's a bit of clarification you need, you could ask. But generally, you don't have to. Because that person has just given you a gift, the gift of feedback. And it is, of course, polite when someone gives you a gift to say thank you very much. So then I treat my feedback, I take it in its little box, still largely wrapped up, and I do with it just what I do with my Christmas presents. You know, I've opened it, I smile very sweetly, I look delighted, thank you, thank you, thank you. And in the back of my mind I'm going, this one's going straight in the bin. This one, actually, I might be able to use that. I'm going to have a crack at that. This one in the middle, man, I'm re-gifting that. I can think who actually needs this piece of feedback. So my recommendation to you is be true to yourself, keep your own style. Now, look, I'm not suggesting that we all be rude and aggressive, selfish, any of those things. Do unto others. You know, I learnt this stuff from my mother when I was very, very young. If you behave like that, if you treat other people by that golden rule, I think you will be fine. But be very careful about style-related feedback because often it is just destructive. And so for those of you that are the feedback givers, think very carefully about never giving style-related labelling feedback unless it is based on direct observation and you can tell the person what they can do differently to be way more effective. So, the last one, let me return to the issue of self-confidence. The report has some really good stuff to say about self-confidence. Because it's very clear, you know, based on the evidence, not just from the people who were interviewed here, but from the broad body of academic knowledge, that self-confidence is a state of mind that is learned and it can be trained. So if you're feeling not too confident about something at a particular point in time, it's not going to be life-threatening forever. You will be able to overcome this. The report also goes on to say that doing so often requires taking risks, being prepared to try and to fail. And you've heard about me learning how to fail and that it wasn't going to kill me. Where did I first learn that lesson? Well, I first learnt that lesson with my parents and it was sporting lessons. Those were very important to me. 2 years in a row, I was the reserve on the state senior women's basketball team. That was a real failure moment. And you have to continue to train just in case someone gets hurt, and that builds a whole lot of resilience. As a kid, we went to live in Kalgoorlie, and I was asked to try out for a team sport that I had never tried before and didn't know the rules of, and I didn't get picked. And I'd been the champion girl athlete and the top of the class, and I had never failed before at all. And the reaction of my parents to that failure was absolutely fantastic. Out they went and bought the rule book and Dad had me training every night in the backyard. And sure, I was in the bottom team because that was what was happened on the allocation day. But at the end of the season, my bottom team, which was me, a little girl with one leg that was shorter than the other and 5 Indigenous girls, absolutely flogged the premiers. Still one of my great moments. You can see it, can't you, Don? I love telling that story. So, if you've got kids, let them fail, okay? And pick them up. And just like Methodist Ladies College says, it's about having that go. It's about letting everyone have that opportunity. I'm learning all the time sitting around the council table at MLC, and that's a lesson I've learnt about how you can help people build their confidence by making sure that they actually do have a go, you know, be prepared to try, and if you fail, you can pick yourself up and have another go. So you can see how valuable I have found this report. I commend it to all of you. I hope these few vignettes that I have brought about my own story and my little bit of a scorecard, because I think if you can't work out which things I think I did well and which I didn't, you haven't been listening too well. But it's certainly been something that I think is very meaningful. Please all read it. Mark it up like I have. Do something different as a result of reading it. Because Western Australia is in a very interesting position right at the moment. You just have to go around West Perth. It's, you could put an Exocet missile through there and not hit anyone at the moment. There's so many places with for lease signs up. We know that people are going through career transitions. So we are going to have to use every single resource, every bit of talent we've got in this state, every bit of creativity. As Marion said, I'm a proud West Australian. I want us to get back to, where we're carrying the country on our back again. So the sooner the better, but in very different ways. Thank you. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Diane. It was how wonderful for her to give herself a scorecard. I'm not sure I'm going to do that for myself, to be honest. So I just think that was just such a great way of getting into the conversation and looking at the recommendations and thinking about, amplifying some of the recommendations, thinking about how they apply in the real world, and also thinking about them in terms of the future of Western Australia. So, Diane, thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask the panellists to join us. So Michael Schock from Shell, who was the chairman of the Filling the Pool Steering Committee, if you could come up. Karen Dill-Mackie, who's a partner at EY, she was also a member of the Filling the Pool Steering Committee, and she's been very active in the last year in getting women in property up through the Property Council, and has also been on her Gender Diversity Committee at EY, and her and I have had many conversations about gender over the last probably 5 or 6 years now. Lloyd Smith from Jared Daniels. Lloyd proudly says that he put me in this role, so this is one of his great moments. He actually put me in 4 roles, so he really is the major recruiter in town, both for CEOs and for board roles. So I'm looking forward to Lloyd sharing some of the insights about what's happening in the economy and around candidates as well. And Adrienne Oliveri, who Westpac was a supporter of the Filling the Pool project, and Adrian's going to talk a little bit about what Westpac are doing to get women back to work after a long disruption in the career. And Conrad Liveris, so Conrad, the gorgeous Conrad, who is a gender equality advocate and sometimes an activist. If you read any of his columns, they are often very pithy and very pointed. And Conrad was involved in the Filling the Pool project right at the beginning, but has taken a very active interest all the way through. So it's now over to you. I would like a question from a gender balanced group. So for every man that asks a question, a woman, and vice versa. And the girls have got microphones around the room. So first question. Come on, don't be shy. Diane's just bared her soul to you. And Conrad would if he was given the opportunity. Wouldn't you, dear?
After you.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Right?
Yep. Great. Professor Kobe Rudd, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Edith Cowan University. My question's about conscious and subconscious bias. And so I'd be interested in the panel's views around ideas or tried and tested ways to address it in the workplace, including the ways of respectfully and, professionally calling it, if that's one of your strategies.
Yep, should be on.
Yeah, maybe let me have a go at that first. So, by definition, unconscious bias is unconscious, so needing to help people to get through that. So the ability to set up procedures and processes in selection panels, for example, that there must be gender balance in selection panels. The flip side of that is making sure that there is applicants for roles, yeah? If that's just one example or a couple of examples of what can be done within organisations, but it really needs to be pushed by the senior leadership of the organisation, because that's, in this issue, from my personal experience, has been the primacy of leadership, yeah, making this a particular issue.
Can I make a comment about that as well? Look, sometimes at a very practical level, when you're sitting on interview panels, whether they're for board positions or CEO positions or any position, it's very important to, and in my role, and often I'm there leading the conversation with the other panel members and as the candidates come through, is to actually tell the panel members what unconscious bias is about. And actually having that conversation and saying things like, you're going to see 4 people today, the person who's interviewed first is most unlikely to get the job. And also to talk about other factors that may affect people's judgment, because when they're not experienced interviewers, they'll immediately make up their mind in the first 5 minutes as to whether the person's right or wrong. And you've got to make sure that there is a proper assignment brief to begin with, because most mistakes are made, and particularly in terms of the unconscious bias, is not actually knowing what you're looking for. So if you're actually crystal clear as to what you're looking for, it also tends to open up more opportunities for women, particularly when you get to explain to them what the role's about when there is more detail, because if there's not enough detail, they'll often count themselves out. Men will always count themselves in.
From a professional services firm, we actually have had all our staff in the Perth office do unconscious bias training. But it hasn't just been at a gender level, we've actually done it across a whole diversity and inclusiveness level. And the surprises that you get from people in those workshops about what they are unconsciously biased about, and the more that you can raise that it's not just gender, everybody has them about particular situations, the better it's actually been. And there's some fantastic websites, I think Harvard has some, where you can do some online questionnaires, and they cover an enormous variety of things about unconscious bias. But the thing I like to stress in our organisation, it's not just doing the unconscious bias training once. It's kind of, you have to keep doing it, and you have to keep having those reminders. So I like to sort of say to people, just put above your phone, before I make this call and pick someone for my team, just take 2 more seconds to think about whether that's actually the right team. So don't go straight for that first thought. Take a couple of minutes to think about what's the right team, and is it being inclusive, is it being diverse? And frequently that will do it. So how do we constantly remind people to think about it?
And look, from a Westpac point of view, absolutely, we have lots of training and development on unconscious bias as well. And I think another thing that I've found really important when interviewing people is to make sure that there's more than one person doing the interview, because I, for example, might think that I don't have any unconscious bias, but I would. And so it's good to have diverse people interviewing so that you've got different people's perspectives, because you never know what you're looking for, and people will also ask different questions in the interview because based on their bias. So I just think diversifying who's interviewing, as well as the coaching and the training and development, will help us in that piece.
Just really quickly, in the past couple of weeks there's been an article on Harvard Business Review, and it was saying that if you're interviewing just one woman as part of a candidature, she's not going to get the job. She's just not. There's no grey area about that. The data was quite compelling. So it's important to keep that in mind, and I think that also kind of leads into a further idea, and you're from a university, evidence helps. If you've got someone who's consistently making an issue or passing over someone, point it out and point to a historical sort of aspect to it, because that's what's going to get people thinking, because the first response people have to these things is, oh, you're just cherry picking there and it's a once off. It's probably not.
Diane, did you want to make any comment?
Oh, yeah, I will say one thing. It's very true that unconscious bias is unconscious. It's been called out so much these days that everyone knows that you have to be careful not to be biased, and there are so many techniques. People are working very hard to take the opportunity for unconscious bias out of the systems and practices. So if it seems that there's bias left, it's probably just bias, and that's, I think, what Conrad is saying. When you think that's there, if you're in an organisation where the organisation doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to get rid of that bias, there's only one thing for you to do. Go find one that does.
And I would add I worked in an IT company when I very first came to Perth. I actually took a demotion to take the job, and I bumped into my old state manager recently, and he said, "You've done well for yourself." And I said, "You sound surprised." So at that point he didn't know what to say, and we walked past each other. So that might be a little tip for some of you. Now I'd love to have a question from a man if possible. Perfect. Down the front here on the Brookfield table.
Thank you very much. John Gardner, Citadel Magnus. Diane, thank you for that presentation. It was insightful and I think inspiring for I think everybody in the room. So I know we certainly need to get a copy of that document before we leave. I wanted to pick up on the topic of self-promotion, and I'm going to make a generalisation to begin with, and that is that I've found from dealing with different multinationals and organisations around the world at various times that I've found often American people to be very good at self-promoting in an appropriate way. And it's a question for all the panel, but I thought, Diane, from your experience of dealing in the US and working there, as a starting point, whether you have any practical tips for this room on how to appropriately and effectively self-promote in the cultural environment of Australia.
Yeah, John, thanks very much for that question, because we are a bit of a culture where tall poppies, tend to be perhaps open for being cut down. Having worked in the US for 8 years and spent a lot of time recruiting people from all different cultures and backgrounds at McKinsey, I think the curriculum that's at schools all the way, from the elementary schools through middle and senior school in what we would call high school and university curriculums really has a lot more of this outward orientation. And I think the fraternities and sororities that are at many of the US universities have a very strong networking element where they put the undergraduate students in particular in contact with people that are already in the business community. And that's what UWA tries to do with the advisory board of the business school that I'm on, and I think Curtin and other universities, Murdoch, have exactly the same ideas and have worked that through. But I think it is systemic in the US system that people are taught how to self-promote. And just as the report says, this is a learned skill.
And Conrad, did you want to reflect on that? So both Conrad and Holly in the room have done the LEAP program, which is held at UCLA every year, which basically teaches young people all the things I learnt over the lifetime of my career, and you learn them in 6 days. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it's kind of a deep dive into the American culture, for a lack of better words. And one of the things that I kind of took away from those sort of experiences is that, we all know what we're good at. It's making sure that other people know, and it's making sure that other people know that you're good at something when there's nothing on the line. And so it just kind of becomes known that Marion knows how to run membership organisations really well. So it's, that just comes straight to mind. And it's getting into that sort of understanding of things that's really going to get you across the line, because it's kind of putting it into the unconscious, if you will, because as soon as you say, oh, we need someone who's got, finance experience in Asia for this next role, well, you'll go, I know exactly who that's going to be because they keep on telling me about that work that they keep on doing. And sure, that might make them annoying every now and then. The vast majority of the time, they're probably all right people.
And Lloyd, do you notice any difference in candidates? Because through the boom, we would have had a lot of different nationalities come through the doors at Gerard Daniels. Have you seen a difference in the way people talk about their track record?
Well, yes, you do, and I guess because we do have an office in the US, I get to meet a lot of people over there as well, and they are very, very self-confident, and they're taught at a young age, and it manifests itself in so many ways, often in underperformance or being underwhelmed by their offering. I think I want to pick up on some points, though, that were really made by Diane about issues that I face when people come to me saying, look, I want to go onto boards, or I want to get a senior management role. In particular, I'm talking to women. And that's that issue to do with self-promotion and the networking part, the fear that goes with all of that, and also that other little intersection between mentors and supporters. And supporters are very, very important people in this context. But what I tend to say to women is just be thoroughly prepared, because they tend to be better than men at preparing for either interviews or presentations, but also just be yourself. Don't try and be somebody else or some other kind of role model that you're latching onto, because you've got a lot to offer. And what you need to be clear about, though, is what your offer is, and sometimes then just not clear. So it's taking a little bit of time to sit down with people and say, it's not so much about the hard networking, but if you don't let people know that you're available, and I think as Conrad just said, being very clear about what kind of skill sets you've got and building up that picture out in the broader community, then your supporters will carry your name forward. Bearing in mind for boards, about 7 out of 10 recommendations to boards for board positions come from other board members. And so therefore, within that broad supporter network, you're right, Diane, mentors can do one thing, they can give advice after you get perhaps offers or opportunities, but the supporters are the people who need to know who you are, what you've got to offer.
Right, a question from a woman if possible, just so we can keep the gender balance going. Got a question? This woman down here.
Hello, Amanda Price from Oricon. A few comments have been made about sponsors, and I was just wondering if anyone would like to talk a little bit on, I guess, how to get a sponsor, because I would sort of think it's hard to go to someone and say, can you please sponsor me? It's something that would maybe happen naturally. So I was wondering if anyone could talk on that.
Can I make a few comments?
Sure.
As more and more time has gone on in my career, I've really realised how important sponsors are to an organisation and how that really does drive your career and how it goes. So it's been quite interesting. I've been part of a Women in Property mentoring section, and I have a couple of mentors. It's a very formal program, and I've had a lot of young women who have come through and we've been discussing things together. And they've been in smaller organisations and they are looking at their sponsor being the person above them. And that person is actually speaking for them, but is actually loving the role that they're doing because they're such a brilliant doer. They're a really good doer, they're doing a fantastic job, and the person above them recognises that, but they're the person who is the only sponsor that they've got. And I've been discussing with them and I'm going, well, it is a small organisation, but surely there are other people within that organisation that you need to talk to, that you need to show what your skills are, what you're good at, so that they can understand and they can actually be there when you're not there to actually talk up for you. And I think it's a really, really important role. It doesn't have to be formal, but you do have to start that networking and you do have to start letting them know what you're good at and how well you're doing it. And I've just been quite surprised at the number of women who have come and we've spoken about it, where they are relying on just one. You need to spread that, you need to have many. And you are very good at it and you don't want to be a doer, right? You want to get your career moving. So networking is very important.
Can I just add just a very quick comment? I mean, if you're going to be get the message out there, you've got to speak to 10, 20 more supporters. It's not just one or two, as you've just said. And people don't mind, actually, and they like, if you ring up, make a call, can I come and talk to you? I just want to discuss some aspect of my career. People always have the time, and they'll always give you half an hour just to give advice. If you're trying to hit on for a job, it's a bit harder sometimes, but just advice. People are always prepared to give it.
Marion, can I make 2 points? And the first one would be to the leaders into the room the responsibility of becoming a sponsor. To women, the obligation about pulling other women through, which is one of the observations coming out of the filling the pool, and indeed this issue of confidence. So I now appeal directly to the men in the room. One of the things I learned in the filling the pool study was the issue of self-confidence, and it was virtually ubiquitous throughout the study and of all of the women that Terry had spoken to, and he informed me that this happens all the time. At the same time, I was reading an article about Gail Kelly, and she told her own story, and she calls it about digging deep. So the challenge there is when you have a role and there's no women that apply, that is probably because those that are capable are lacking the self-confidence. So your responsibility is actually to go out and find them. Yeah? I tell the anecdote at the end of the Filling the Pool study presentation 11 months ago. This lady had come up to me and spoke about it, and she'd been very successful in her career, and she'd left to go and have a baby, and she said that her organisation had shown her the advertisement for her job, which she'd been doing successfully for 3 years. And her response was, actually, I wouldn't have had the courage to actually apply for that job, the one that she'd been doing. Men aren't aware of that issue. Yeah? To be aware gives you the opportunity to go in action. That's not quite sponsorship, but being cognizant of that and going out and those women who you see as talented taking the opportunity.
And while you've got the microphone in your hand, Shell worked alongside us with filling the pool, and the recommendations for organisations became part of a self-assessment process. So do you want to talk about what that process was like and what you found at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. So off the back of the study, we chose to do a self-assessment, 4 senior leaders from our organisation who went out and reviewed our policies and our methodologies and our performance against the 18, discreetly for the 18 recommendations associated for organisations. Secondly, we went and looked at market leaders and what do they do. Sense checked that against 5 different divisions within our organisation, and ultimately sense checked that across through some working groups to identify where do we think we're doing okay and where do we have gaps, which then allowed the subsequent actions, which was to so that was reported back to the country leadership team. This is where we have gaps. This is how we're going to group these the discrete actions. Seeked a country leader as a champion, and then set about setting targets and quarterly reporting back to the Australian leadership team. So if that's been the immediate response to see how we're actually going. In the 11 months since, we've had 2 particular milestones. One is we moved into our new office, in which it's availed the childcare. But taking that one step further, the childcare is what I call the hardware, is actually availing parking for parents so they can bring their kids in, because although we're on fantastic public transport, at peak hours is a key issue, taking kids in maybe in prams and nappies and whatever. So putting the software to actually make the hardware work was one milestone, and it kind of starts to give some impetus around the business that was quite symbolic. And secondly, getting the Workplace Gender Equity Agency citation for another year, which is just external reinforcement that actually we're doing okay. And in fact, that becomes really important, having got it a couple of years in a row now. The citation is becoming quite precious about maintaining that.
And that citation is about having no pay gap, or virtually no pay gap, across the organisation for like roles. So, Karen, EY's done some consulting work around the pay gap, and it was a key recommendation in filling the pool. What's happened?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who have over 100 employees, so you are actually obliged to actually take your pay gender gap report and actually report that. So we're seeing a lot of people doing the compliance work. That's very good, and there are a lot of tools on the WGEA site to actually do that. What we've actually found is a lot of people are finding it difficult to get the information easily and quickly from their systems. So we've actually spent a lot of time trying to make that more efficient, because it's very important to have that baseline information to make sure that it's realistic. So spending a lot of time making sure the categories are right, that you're comparing like for like, that you're actually getting the right sort of data from your pay orders. Have to say it's been slow. It is more of a compliance function, which I think is unfortunate, because I think, like you were saying, Marion, it is such a wonderful platform to go out to your employees and talk to them about what you're actually doing and how you're doing it. There's not many females in WA that don't know that our gender pay cap is 24% and it looks pretty bad. And every one of them sits out there and goes, is that me? And every one of them is sitting out there saying, what is my organisation doing about it, and can I address it the next time I speak to the leader in regards to what they've done, what they've seen and what their strategy is. So I think we're still at a very compliance level. We need to move more into the whole, getting it into the roadwork, the roadmap, because it's all interlocked, and using that as the platform for information to actually tell everybody what you're doing, how that's going to fit strategically into your business plan. And it's a golden opportunity, because you have got every single one of your female, and this is about retaining females in your work plan, asking where are they on that scale. Because if you're saying your organisation, like ours, produces that we have a 1.8% pay gap, so if we're 1.8, then someone else must be much worse than 24.8% somewhere. So where are you on that scale? And we have internally done our own pay gap very rigorously. We now have partner toolkits. That is, that the partners can look at the information, understand where the differences are, ask the right questions, be prepared to sit down with their people and actually talk about it, and make them feel wanted and make them understand where they are in that pay gap. So it's a really powerful tool. love to see more people using it.
Conrad, did you want to talk about the pay gap and your article, which was a lot about disappointment with family firms and privately held organisations?
I'm not too sure what you're
Well,
talking
you were saying they basically haven't done a pay gap audit.
Oh, yeah. The smaller the organisation, the worse it is, and the less likely that they are to have done something. And in Western Australia, if you're not on the terrace or part of a national model, national organisation, you probably haven't. You probably haven't considered it. And it's just the harsh reality of the data that's available, and I checked it against the agency information, and it's incredibly disappointing.
So it's almost like if you've got a report for over 100, you'll do it, and if you don't have to do it, 99 and under, you won't.
Oh, you definitely won't. There's no.
And we found that in the Property Council as well when we did our reports.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Karen was talking about this being a compliance issue. Yeah, it definitely, that's the way that it's being looked at. The reality is that the more you understand about your organisation and your staff, the better you are in how to best use those resources. This is really basic sort of management sort of stuff. And by ignoring these sort of functions and the issues that come with it, you're almost shooting yourself in the foot. It doesn't really make that much sense to me, or, you know, to any manager that I've been speaking to about this.
And as I said, I think that there's a reputational issue that, as Diane said, there are companies out there doing the right thing by women, and they've got a very good reputation for doing so, and those that aren't probably will find it very hard to keep women or attract them.
I think you'll find that the women closely associated with those organisations have a hunch and are probably talking to some people about it.
They might be talking to Lloyd about a new job.
Yes, well, there's no such secret as remuneration secrets, I can tell you.
Right, we're up to a man, I think, out there in the universe. Yep.
Thanks, Marion. Jeff Pontifex from ANZ. I'm just interested in how the different industries, if you like, are tackling job design for returning ladies to the work.
And Adrian, I think probably start off with what Westpac's doing.
Hi, Jeff. Yeah, look, absolutely. So in terms of what Westpac's doing, there's a number of programs that they're doing. I'll talk about two in particular. One's called Carers at Work and one's called All In Flex. The Carers at Work is really designed for exactly your question. So how do we bring people to return back to work? We've actually developed an online portal which all employees can access, which actually has a whole lot of information around, you know, returning to work, how to actually approach people for roles when you come back, but also it provides one-on-one coaching. So for more senior roles in particular that have got more demanding travel schedules and things like that, we actually provide a coach to actually coach the people along how they can actually return to work. And there's also a monthly program where there's 4 different training and development sessions that we hold around actually the practical, so how you actually return to work, how you to stay in touch with people when you're away from work. So that's a really great piece of work that we've done. The other one is called All In Flex, and that's where a little while ago Westpac actually has mandated that for every role that's out there, you need to actually look at how can we make the role flexible. So what can we actually do? So managers are actually empowered to say, you know, the answer should always be yes. There is a possibility that this role could be job share, part-time, work from home, you know, what flexibility people need. So the culture has actually changed, and we're actually trying to have more senior people display that, so lead from the top. So, for example, if I talk about myself, 13 years ago, I was lucky enough to have my son and wasn't able to return full-time. But it was actually through my manager and a lady who's sitting at the table there that we actually worked out that we could do a job share. And so we were able to come back, both of us, and work part-time, still keep our careers going. And I, for the last 13 years, have worked from home 1 day a week in every different role that I've done at Westpac. And without that flexibility, being able to pick my kids up and drop them off from school 1 day a week, I wouldn't be able to do some of the roles that I've been doing. But it's all different managers in Westpac that have supported me, all different roles. And I guess what I'm trying to show is that there is a way that that you can do a number of different roles in a whole lot of different divisions with a whole lot of different managers, and you can work flexibly and make it work. It's work-life blend, I call it. You know, I work weekends, I work at nights, but I appreciate that I've got that flexibility, and that makes me be more loyal to Westpac, and I think they actually get 150% out of me because of that. But, you know, the more I think we do that, the more that the world is requiring people to work part-time, people to work up north. You know, we need to be providing the flexibility and the tools and the coaching to ensure people can come back to work. Another piece of work, if I've just got 2 more seconds, that I'll talk about that Westpac's recently brought in is actually how do we bring people without banking experience into Westpac. So we've actually done a program where we've brought a number of people in who have no banking experience at all and mentored them and paired them up with other people so that they can come in at more senior levels as well, because they're, you know, highly qualified, intelligent people, and I'm talking about women in particular. And we actually want those skills, and we can see that we actually need more than just banking skills if we're going to be successful going forward. So there's a number of great things that we're doing that I'm really proud of.
And Karen, I'm going to put you a little bit under the microscope here. We interviewed a range of sectors for the Filling the Pool report, but the professional services firms came out worst in that there was a culture of first in, last out. That was the only way to prove that you were a valuable employee. Has anything changed?
That is putting me on the spot. Well, yes, I hope so. I think that there is a lot more what we call different lenses put over everything now. We make sure that we have the policies in place, that we have systems for people to return to work. There are a lot of us female partners who are available in every meeting to actually put that lens across and to make sure that we are addressing things in the right way. Yes, we have made progress. We always have room to move, but I think as an organisation we have done very well. We did a very similar thing to Michael in regards to the roadmap, and sort of sat down and said, right, you know, what can the organisation do and what can women do? And Catherine and myself have worked together and sort of gone, this is the bit where we think we can make the most for our organisation. And it's very much around a particular course that we give our senior women leaders, which is about the inner voice, removing the inner voice, removing that doubt, speaking up, doing that. But we recognise that we do that probably too late. We need to do that more at the manager level. We need to do it to people at that particular stage in their life when they are managing their families and when they are managing that flexible time, and actually remove the inner voice. Think about what they're doing for their career direction. So that's where we think we can make a difference. And it's all around the roadmap, and we're trying to make sure that we put that through our organisation. So we are making changes.
Good.
I feel we are progressing.
Pleased to hear it. Okay, a woman. One down the front here and one up the back there. So whoever can get a microphone the quickest. I think Tegan's coming here.
It's Michelle Narrostrang. We've talked a little bit about the tangible measures and processes that can be used to open the gateway to generate attraction and retention strategies. I'm interested now in some observations around more of the intangibles, and particularly any experience or observations from the panel going to the heart of Diane's point about style and where that intersects with established norms and the potential for acculturation and the loss of diversity and talent through that process.
I think it's a great question. Diane, do you want to kick off?
Sure, I'm happy to have a go. It's a really broad question, thank you very much. And I think there are so many elements of that, and really what you're striking at is the core of the double bind, which is the way women are expected to behave, the way men are expected to behave, those cultural norms. And I think you hear a lot about the double bind as it applies to women. You don't hear so much about it as it applies to men, but I think they are as confronted by it for those that want to take a greater caring responsibility. We had a Chief Executive Women event where we were looking at our gender parity one of the guys who was there was the husband of one of the main consultants, and he'd been in the public sector, and he talked about their attempts to provide him with flexibility so he could take a caring role with his newborn son as mutual career suicide. So that was very much an issue for them as well. So it's when you do something that looks dissonant with the role that you're supposed to have, and when you act in a particular way that isn't expected, that becomes a real problem. So, I think the nuance about how do you make that change when you see that the organisational settings aren't ready for it. And I think that, I talked about getting on my high horse and how that was absolutely not the response. So that's not what you do, what should you do? And I look now, from so many years down 20 years down the track of that, and the skills that I've learned around the board table about how to ask a question without necessarily putting people offside, but getting them to give you the answer that was the thing almost they didn't want to say. And I think that's the core of it. When you're trying to make some change, it is like, think about pay. I'd like more money, please, versus how does this position me in the overall pay landscape? Will I be paid at the median, below it or above it? What are the things that will really be important in changing the trajectory of my pay? How steep is it normally? These sorts of illuminating questions. Why is it so? How does it work? Help guide me. And so I think when you're faced with a double bind and you want to keep your style and be authentic, but you want to do something that you know is unacceptable, ask questions. That's one of, I think, 15 answers that could have come to your question, but I hope that's helpful in some way.
And probably taking that a step further, Mike, if you can just think about an answer for a workplace that's got so many different cultures in it. So not only does Shell itself have a very prevailing culture, but you're importing talent in and out of the Perth office all the time. And you yourselves have to go and work in other offices where maybe even English isn't the first language. So how does that all work?
That's a really tough question to kind of to summarise how it all hangs together. It's been working for 110 years. So. But what I would put there, and certainly what comes through in the Filling the Pool project, is the primacy of leadership. And I'm going to go a bit off track here. The issue that we address within our own organisation is one associated with safety. We've been on this journey for a couple of generations. And it's only probably in this last generation it's all been associated with leadership and how people behave. And that's what's flowing through, what I'm bearing witness to flow through, associated with diversity and indeed inclusion. Statements which come from the Global Chief Executive and their behaviours, and indeed they've asked the organisation to treat diversity in our business plans as we indeed would treat safety, which is a fairly big statement.
Yeah. And so that's diversity broadly, not just gender.
Not just gender, but gender is the most obvious, and it becomes extremely important. So taking issue with that and how that translates into the different cultures, following that up with the local chief executive with the targets for this is what we are doing, leads to a whole range of behaviours. And the issue is in a large organisation you have pockets of excellence, wholly attributable to that division's leader, and pockets which are nowhere near where they should be. But being able to push that down through not just your seniors but your distributed leaders becomes extremely important, particularly in a big organisation.
So if I can reflect on Shell, I got to go to Shell's head office in The Hague and to brief their global HR team on Filling the Pool a couple of weeks before it was launched. And I happened to also meet with the head of their global scenarios team, a guy called Wim Thomas, who Shockey organised for me to meet with. And he said, so you're here talking about gender equality and what's the project about and blah, blah, blah. And he was very puzzled all the way through me, being very earnest and explaining the very tough journey we'd had to come up with a set of recommendations that would be acceptable to the Perth community. And he said, Marion, can I just reflect for a moment? In the Netherlands, we have passed the euthanasia bill. We do not talk about gender equality. It is off the agenda. It has been off the agenda for so long because it's just part of the way we live. So there's a cultural difference. They were dealing with the really big social issues in their mind, and gender was something they'd been dealing with, and they felt that they'd pretty much solved over a couple of decades. So a man. Have we got a man to ask a question? Come on, guys. Yes. In the middle there, girls. And that'll be the last one.
Thank you. Richard Sandover from Jacks McDonald. Just recently I was privileged to attend an event organised by my construction partner, Isla McRobbie, who's sitting on my right here, and it was Women in Cabinet. It was organised for some of the federal female ministers to attend and talk about women in government and the sorts of issues we've been discussing today. What struck me about them was the dynamism, the energy, and the collaboration, which clearly we had the Minister for Defence, Minister for Employment, and the Deputy Prime Minister, and a senior senator, all women. And the way they quite obviously worked together, cooperated, respected each other, struck me. I haven't had that opportunity to speak to that many male senior members of Cabinet before, but it does occur to me that the Cabinet as it's presently constituted is quite different, unique, and I found it very exciting. I just wonder if you've got a comment about that.
Well, I have to say I was at the event and I totally echo Richard's comments. It was just delightful. Here are these women who are obviously got very powerful positions inside government, talking about their portfolios, what was happening, and then they're just this supportive trickle through to each of them. And I think they really rely on that fraternity very strongly. So one of the recommendations in filling the pool is take the responsibility to bring another woman along. There was some commentary at the beginning of filling the pool that some women had made it and they were making it their business to make sure other women weren't making it. I think that's completely wrong now. I don't think so. So anyone got any comments to make?
Yeah.
The sisterhood.
The sisterhood, the scary skirts. And so, yeah, I think that is a really important point that you've just made, that, you know, we're still living sometimes with this fallacy that women are their own worst enemies. I've seen lots of blokes be terrible to each other too, if only we uncovered that a little bit more. But especially on that sort of point where, you know, in these very public roles, you know, politicians, we've all got access sometimes, you know, and you see people working together and they relish it and they're really trying to charge ahead as a team, and it's so wonderful. But, you know, turning that to Diane and Chief Executive Women, those women are exactly the same. They have this common vision, they have this common goal, they recognise that making these broad impacts are so important. It'd be so wonderful if we were able to actually unleash that power across broader corporate Australia, because the benefits, you know, the Governor was talking about $300 billion before if we did close the gender gaps. How amazing would that be? We'd all be laughing. We'd all be closer to being millionaires and billionaires.
And we'd be also proud of ourselves. So Diane, did you want to make a comment about Chief Executive Women?
Thank you, and thanks for the shout out, Conrad. You're really good at that. So one of the most fun things that I get to do at Chief Executive Women is we have a thing called the CEO conversation. And this is for the CEO who has a leadership team that isn't meeting their gender equity aspirations. And generally what we find is it's a team that doesn't have a lot of women around the table as it is, because if you've already got a diverse senior leadership team, it's probably flowing through the rest of the organisation. So we front up at minimum 3, but sometimes more of our members. They're carefully hand-selected to be able to provide insights, stories, personal experiences that might help your particular leadership team with the struggles that it has. And when you wander into the room and you plonk down, and suddenly the men in the leadership team have this realisation that here are 3 women who are as powerful, as successful, and as confident as they are, the whole dynamic in the room suddenly changes. And what they get is an experience where diversity has come to them, and you see that penny drop. It's not that to the governor's point, that women bring better skills. It's not even the synergy of a set of different skills around the table. It's that at core, when you bring a diverse group of people, they work together differently. The process they use to address a problem, the process they use to ventilate a problem just looks different. So I absolutely agree with you, Richard. I think your hypothesis that women do tend to have a little bit more of that collegiate nature that's more evident, a bit more, on our sleeves, is something that is part of that overall diversity mix, and it would be great if all of our teams were like that.
What a wonderful note to end on. I'm going to ask John Smolders from Giorgio to give the vote of thanks, and whilst he's walking up, I wanted to give my own personal thanks to Diane. What a wonderful presentation. Diane advised me not to go onto a sporting board. I didn't take her advice, and God, I wish I'd taken it. Shockey was brilliant to work with during filling the pool and continues to be now as a board member of Committee for Perth. Karen Jalmacki and I really want one day to never have a discussion about gender equality again. We just want the problem fixed. As I said, Lloyd and I have been great mates for a long time, and I really value his opinion on my career, and he was the one who told me I had to get an MBA or I was never going to get another CEO's role. Adrian, thanks very much for stepping in for Heather Murphy from Westpac, and I think we can learn some things there. And Conrad, as ever, Conrad's the sort of person that when I've had a bad day, I can ring him, and
Thanks,
he is
Mum.
very sympathetic. And to the Governor, thank you very much for your opening comments and for attending and being so interested in filling the pool and the work of the Committee for Perth.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Smolders, Executive Director of Giorgio Developments, and it's my very great pleasure not only to be the only male to stand at the lectern this afternoon, but to thank our guest speakers and panel members, to reflect on some of today's key points, and to close this afternoon's proceedings. At Giorgio, we recognise the importance of attracting and maintaining a diverse workforce that reflects the diversity of our clients and our partners and the sectors and locations in which we operate. We have embraced the challenges of achieving this vision and implemented a range of initiatives that are sponsored at executive level and permeate all levels of our organisation. We have a Gender Diversity Committee known as EDGE, Employee Diversity and Gender Equity, there you go, comprising 10 members, equally made up of male and female. Previously known as WIG, Women in Giorgio, it was felt that men needed to be involved and played an important part in the conversation. At Giorgio, 18% of our staff are women, somewhat better than the construction industry average of 4.9%, but we still have a long way to go. In our cadet program a few years ago, we set a target to recruit 50-50, males and females in the intake group, and we're very pleased and very proud to have successfully achieved this in both 2014 and 2015, with the 2016 group yet to be selected. 2 years ago, we began a mentoring program with Jackson McDonald, with the objective of increasing the number of female Giorgio staff with mentors. This initiative has been enormously successful in extending the experiential reach of some of our female staff, and we're very proud to be here today with our friends from Jack Mack and many of our Giorgio mentees. In 2017, we produce and publish Pledge, similar in its framework to our commitment to safety and reconciliation, that outlines our employee and gender diversity initiatives and planned achievements for the next 3 years. On behalf of all of us here today, I would like to extend our very sincere thanks to Her Excellency, the Honourable Kerry Sanderson AO, Governor of Western Australia, for providing today's opening address. Your Excellency, we're grateful to you for joining us and speaking about your thoughts and observations on gender equity, and particularly the Filling the Pool project, and also your ongoing support of Committee for Perth. We've been very fortunate today to have Diane Smith-Gander as our guest speaker, and personally I always look forward to the opportunity to hear Diane share her thoughts on topical issues and provide some insight into the events and experience that have shaped her style and created the leader that she is today. Diane is widely known for her energetic, direct, can-do style, but also her very realistic approach to the challenges we all face day to day in our lives and our businesses. I read a quote from her recently. "I'm a great believer in building on your strengths. Don't try to address your weaknesses. It's much easier to build a muscle that is already strong than to try and build something you are not particularly good at. It's about competitive advantage." I think I'm right. Diane goes on to credit, as she's mentioned today as well, to credit former Westpac senior exec Helen Lynch with helping her understand and adopt this very pragmatic approach. So some observations from today, and there are many, so I'll perhaps just wrap up half a dozen. In WA, we have some specific challenges. We always like to feel we're a bit different and a bit unique in WA, but we do have some challenges in our working and our living environment, and particularly the need for travel and the challenges that brings and the pressures that brings to families, to individuals, to husbands and wives. We've also heard today that the conversation needs to start early, in the school age years, as this is where career path discussions and academic strategies often begin. And I suppose I reach out to the fellow parents of daughters in the room to start that conversation as soon and as early and as meaningfully as possible. Start with an end goal. We've heard that from a couple of speakers today. That goal may evolve, it may take on a different shape as time progresses, but start with shaping your personal strategy with an end goal in mind. Work to build self-confidence, develop resilience, be true to yourself, keep your own style, and do unto others. Don't let failure define you. Let how you respond to failures be what defines you. And in a similar vein, be strategically opportunistic. Take on the difficult tasks, the tricky situations. Have a go. Bring men into the conversation. And men in the room, fellow men in the room, we have a critical role to play in this. Speak up for women. Be a supporter of women in your workplace. Call out behaviours that aren't helping us move forward on this issue. And lastly, second lastly, I've got 7. If you can't make your organisation friendly to women, you can't make it friendly to anyone. A very strong message to all of us of all gender, both genders. Okay. There was one moment where I knew that was going to happen. Flexibility is crucial to all staff, female and male, to be productive and to thrive. Lastly, and I hope you all recall, Diane set us all a challenge. Develop and keep 3 advocates, true supporters, who will play a role in de-risking a hiring or promotional decision, who will be what Helen Lynch was for Diane in her Bob Avery moment. Diane, you're always very accommodating and generous with your time that we appreciate. It's very precious given your many commitments and workload. And I'd like to thank you so very, very much for being with us today. We're enormously grateful, and I'd like you to accept a small token of our appreciation. Thank you, Diane.
Isn't it gorgeous? Oh, photo moment. I'm very happy with this, Marion, and well chosen. Thank you.
I'd also like to express our very sincere thanks to our panel members, Karen Dilmacchi, Adrian Oliveri, and Conrad Leveris. I'd also like to thank Lloyd Smith, and you can tell we shop together. Some of you are struggling to tell us apart, but I do my hair slightly differently. I'd also like to thank Michael Schock, not only for his participation on today's panel, but for his company's support and also his personal commitment to the Filling the Pool Gender Equity Research Project. Thank you, Shocky. In closing, I strongly encourage everyone here to reread, or perhaps read for the first time, Committee for Perth's Filling the Pool research paper. That's what it looks like. There's a heap of them outside for those of us that still need paper. If you don't, you'll find it on the website, committeeforperth.com.au. and then go straight to the search bar and type in filling the pool and you'll find it. Better still, I'd like you to make a point of telling 10 other people about it, people who aren't here today, and encourage them to read and reflect on its research and its recommendations. There are actions in there for all of us, male and female, employer and employee, at all levels of an organisation and within our community. Like all of Committee's fact-based research, it's free and easily accessible and there to be permeated throughout our community, business and personal networks, and to allow more informed discussion, debate and decision making. Lastly, can I thank every one of you for attending today, for your keen interest in this topic, but more so for your commitment to playing a part in making a difference. Ladies and gentlemen, have a very good afternoon. Thank you.